sound suppressor water now
15.
flowing under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiate. 7, 6, 5. 4-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis I. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
All 4 RS-25 engines on the core stage and 2 solid rocket boosters now propelling the vehicle at 128 miles per hour. Hearing good control on the roll from teams in mission control.
Good morning, and thank you all for staying up with us at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. I'm NASA Press Secretary Jackie McGinnis, and this morning at 1:47 a.m., NASA's Space Launch System rocket and Orion spacecraft lifted off from Kennedy's historic launch pad 39B. Orion's on its way, and it's just beginning its mission. It's successfully completed a number of mission milestones so far, including the trans-lunar injection burn to put it on its trajectory to the moon. To provide you all with an update this morning, we have NASA Administrator Bill Nelson, Mike Serafin, Artemis Mission Manager out of NASA headquarters, Mike Bolger, John Honeycutt, Space Launch System Program Manager at Marshall, Howard Hugh, Orion Program Manager at Johnson, and Emily Nelson, Chief Flight Director at Johnson. It's been an incredible day, and so first I'll open it up to each of our participants to say a few words. Administrator.
I was standing on the roof of the LCC with a number of astronauts, and I'm telling you, we've never seen such a tail of flame. There were a bunch there that would like to be on that rocket. And I have to say, for what we saw tonight, it's an A+. It's a test flight. Took a long time coming to get here. Last time we were on the moon, Apollo 17, and we still have a long ways to go. And this is just the test flight. And we are stressing it and testing it in ways that we will not do to a rocket that has a human crew on it. But that's the purpose, to make it as safe as possible, as reliable as possible for when our astronauts crawl on board and go back to the moon. The enthusiasm throughout, not only this Space Center, even though a lot of America was in bed asleep, it will be apparent tomorrow. And the legacy that this professional crew put together in getting us to this day over the years is a legacy that indeed has been well earned and will continue as we now explore the heavens as we go back to the moon and then we go to Mars. Thanks, Jackie.
And over to you, Mike Serafin.
Yeah, good morning, and thank you again for continuing to follow our program in the Artemis I mission. We've talked to you a number of times about our 4 mission priorities. Demonstrate the vehicle at lunar reentry conditions, demonstrate the vehicle in the spaceflight environment as priority 2, retrieve the spacecraft as priority 3, and then bonus objectives associated with science outreach and technology demonstrations. We have a priority 1 mission in play right now. We had the rocket do its job and deliver the spacecraft to the point of translunar injection. And I want to thank John Honeycutt and the SLS program for putting that priority 1 mission in play, as well as Jody Singer at the Marshall Space Flight Center and the Marshall Space Flight Center team. They did an amazing job getting us to this point, as well as our friends and family here in America's spaceport under Janet Petro and Mike Bolger and his EGS program team and our launch director, Charlie Blackwell Thompson. They did an amazing job applying lessons learned and getting us to this point. We do have a Priority 1 mission in play because of their work. Today, we got to witness the world's most powerful rocket take the Earth by its edges and shake the wicked out of it, and it was quite a sight. It's quite a sight. We're going to learn a lot more as we go. We've got 4 weeks of mission to go. We are just barely starting to scratch the surface of the Artemis program and gather data. We've learned a few things along the way, mostly that this system is performing exactly as we intended it to. We've had a few funnies along the way. We had some dropouts in the flight instrumentation on the SLS rocket. We've had some funnies and some in the star trackers, and then we had some funnies in some micro switches on the solar array wings, but the systems are performing and we are pressing outbound toward the moon. We are going to continue to gather data as part of those mission priorities and mission objectives as we described earlier. And, speaking for myself, there's definitely relief that we're underway. But we also have a heightened sense of awareness that this mission is underway. And I personally am not going to rest well until we get safely to splashdown and recovery. So with that, I'll pass it back to Jackie.
And now we can hear from Mike Bolger, the ground systems.
Yeah, thank you. What an amazing day and what an amazing launch. I'm actually envious of y'all because many of you were outside watching it, and we're sitting inside the firing room, looking through the glass panes. And it was a little bit, there's some moisture on the glass panes, and so we didn't, I think, have nearly the view that y'all had. But from everything that I could tell, it was well worth the visit here to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida to see the mission. Mike talked about the 4 priority goals that we have. I would add a 5th, and that was to prove that our ground systems and our ground team was prepared and was ready to launch this mission today, and I think they passed with flying colors. We really had a terrific day. It's been a journey for us as a ground operations team. The team has shown a ton of resilience. We've worked in a COVID environment. We've dealt with hurricanes. We've been through first-time ops, and the team has shown the resilience and the resolve to do something really special, and that's what we did today. I think a lot of us come to NASA. You kind of dream about it when you're a kid. I can't tell you how many people I work with who dream about it when they're 10 or 11 years old, and they kind of make it a point, I'm going to come work for NASA someday. And part of that reason is to make an impact or to be a part of changing the world. And I think today we did exactly that. We really helped jumpstart this nation's manned exploration program, or to keep it going, really to move further and further into the solar system. So a really great day for us here, and really proud of the team today. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Now we'll go to John Honeycutt with the SLS program.
Yeah, hey, I just want to say I am envious too, like Mike talked about. But the few seconds that we did get to look out the LCC, I'm looking at this big ball of fire, and I'm thinking, it's been a little over 12 years since I got to experience this, and it's so awesome to be back in the business doing it. And we've laid the foundation for the Artemis program and many generations to come. The team just did an outstanding job. As you heard the administrator say, the rocket performed outstandingly. We had a good performance on the hardware all day today, and of course, I'm looking at those really dynamic events as we get down into the last seconds for when the RS-25s fire up, and then we get booster ignition, and then watching the performance of the core stage, especially those dynamic events associated with the pressurization system and the auxiliary power units, all performed outstandingly. Core stage with boosters and the RS-25 engines delivered Orion and ICPS per the requirements. And then we had the first burn that gives us the raise, was outstanding, and then the TLI burn performed outstandingly. So right now, I can't say I'm more proud of the way the hardware performed and even more proud of the team. Jackie.
Thank you very much. Now over to Howard with the Orion program.
Yeah, good evening or morning, I think, to everybody. What a terrific day we've had. First, I want to thank the gentlemen to my right, John and Mike. I mean, they're just terrific team getting us off the ground and headed to the moon. I mean, I can't thank them enough for their team's efforts. And now we get to start the journey and learning more about our spacecraft and accomplishing these missions that Mike talked about just a little bit over 26 days. And along the way, we've got the rocket, the most powerful rocket we've built at NASA, taking us to the moon. And then as we go forward, we'll have the European Service Module that'll be providing the power and propulsion that we need to get into lunar orbit and, of course, return safely home. And I want to also thank the European team. They worked very hard producing the European Service Module for us and in partnership with NASA, and certainly a great opportunity for us as we explore and learn more about the spacecraft and going forward with Artemis. And I would say personally for me, I am one of those men that as a little boy, I dreamed of working for NASA and going beyond low Earth orbit. And today was a fabulous day for me. And I can't tell you, just thinking about watching the rocket go up and seeing Orion go head towards the moon has been a dream of mine. And today is a start of that, a great journey, I would say, for the agency and for Artemis. So thank you.
Thanks, Howard. And to close this out, Emily Nelson from Johnson.
Let's see, this evening we got to see a truly exciting launch that I think is the beginning of a really exciting mission. The LCC team just did a flawless job getting through tanking and getting to liftoff, and then the MCC Houston team had a seamless handover and executed the remainder of that ascent and up to orbit. It was really great to get to see those teams get the opportunity to use the expertise that they've developed over years of training and preparation. This mission is not only going to test the spacecraft, but it's going to test the teams as well. And as we've mentioned, we've already had some opportunities to work through some of those tests, and I am fairly confident that as we progress further to the moon, we're going to run into a few more. The exciting thing about this flight is getting to see how this ship is going to behave in space, how its systems are going to react to the deep space environment. And so next up, right about now, the team is characterizing performance of the solar array structure so that we have a good understanding of how the spacecraft reacts when we do burns. And then here in several hours, we'll do our first outbound trajectory correction burn using the Orion engine so that we'll get to see how those systems behave. We'll get to characterize that performance as well. It's going to be a really exciting ride, and kind of like Mike, I'm not sure we'll get a whole lot of sleep in the next 26 days, but it'll certainly be worth it. So really looking forward to everything we're going to learn here. Back to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Emily. And before we open it up for questions, we want to show you some of the first images of Earth from Orion as it heads to the moon. All right, and now for the fun part. If you could please raise your hand, I'm sorry. Marcia Dunn with the AP.
Marcia Dunn, Associated Press for Mr. Nelson. Apollo is a tough act to follow, and looking back on what has gone before with the moon, what were your emotions at liftoff, and how do you see what happened today as going down in space history?
One of the emotions I had was that I wish that members of the crew that I had participated in were here. A group of professionals, the best of the best. and to see the culmination of a lifetime of sacrifice that they have done. I think back to the real sacrifices, the astronauts that we've lost, not only in flight in Apollo 1, but in the training accidents. All of those emotions welled up in me today. And you should have heard the other astronauts that I was standing with. We were down in the Launch Control Center and all went up on the roof so that we could feel that acoustic shock wave and see undiminished that tail of a flame of fire. And then to see that pillar of smoke, even in the dark of night, it was pretty overwhelming.
Thank you. Joey Roulette with Reuters, up front.
Thanks. Question for John Honeycutt. This rocket, it's been a decade in the making. There's been, billions in cost overruns, and there's been a lot of engineering challenges to get to this point. If you could just kind of tell us a little bit how it feels to finally see this thing come alive and launch. What does that feel like? And then quick one for Mike. Can you kind of go into details about the funnies that you said you guys saw during the mission, and whether there was any debris that was created from the Orion and the RTV issue that you guys might have expected as a risk? Thanks.
Yeah, I tell you, it feels great to get the get the rocket out, and it feels even better to have it perform the way it did. And it's been a long time coming, but I think if you study history and look back on it, these things don't happen overnight, and they all follow similar timelines. The emotion that I have that hits me the most really is, it's the people that do the work that make the hardware what it is. Of course, the hardware does the job at the end of the day, but it's the people that get us to the launch pad and have helped us build this foundation. And they all take a lot of pride in it, and I do too.
Yeah, Joey, in terms of the funnies that we saw, in terms of the imagery findings, we're still working through that. There were a couple of indications that we had some debris liberation fairly early in ascent, and the team is still looking at that. In terms of what exactly it was, again, it's too early to say. The funnies that we saw on the star trackers, there was a component ready flag that was set, and the team had to resolve and basically activate the star trackers in spite of that component ready flag. And then on the solar array wings, when they were deployed, I think it was solar array wing number 3, we saw a pair of micro switches that indicated that it wasn't fully latched, and then they came in. They basically did indicate that they had latched, which indicates it was probably like a thermal condition, especially when you take a vehicle and you take it from ambient conditions on Earth that we purge, and then you take it in the deep space environment. Sometimes you get a little bit of thermal gradient on there, and they came in, and we knew that was something that could happen fairly early on. And then we saw some developmental flight instrumentation on the rocket that dropped out during the ascent. Those were, at this stage of the game, relatively benign. We pressed all the way through the point of translunar injection in spite of those, and right now we're not terribly concerned with any of those. I don't know, Howard, if you have any additional thoughts on that.
No, I think you covered it very well, and of course we're also excited to look at the data, and we'll keep analyzing the data and look at what that tells us. Yeah.
And understand that, things will go wrong. This is a new system, and it's a test flight. And so we're going to expect those things to go wrong, and then we're going to try to work them. This is part. Space is hard. space is real hard when you try to do what we're doing.
Thank you. Tom Costello with NBC. Tom, if you could just, yeah.
Thank you. Well, congratulations to all of you. Mr. Nelson, I'm wondering, it has been 50 years next month since we saw humans on the moon, and now the first step of returning to the moon. So I'm wondering, you talked about the emotions and you thought about those that were lost in the space program over the years, but to think that now, 5 decades later, the first steps in going back, I wonder if you could address that. And then also, you talked about needing to stress it and test it to a greater extreme so that you know exactly what the astronauts will be in for. What does that mean, to stress it and test it, and to this extent now? How will you be doing that? What does that mean?
Well, it has a lot more sensors than will be on the rockets in the future, and that's to know how the vehicle and vehicles perform. Why are we going back? Because our call is we're going out to explore the heavens. And this is the next step. So we went to the moon and we were there for a short period of time and we came back. Then we had Skylab and we started to learn how to live longer in zero G. Then we had the space shuttle and we built the space station. And now we're going back to the moon, not just for the sake of going to the moon, but to learn, to live, to develop, to learn how to live on the moon in order to prepare to send humans all the way to Mars. The moon is just a few days away. Mars is months and months away. And we are understanding now from the James Webb Space Telescope just how big and vast this universe is. There's a lot out there to explore. And this is the next beginning. And this is the Artemis generation.
Thank you. Up here, I'm in the front.
Hi, Ken Kramer, Space Up Close. Well, congratulations to all of you. That was so impressive and inspiring, and thanks for letting us be here. So, Bill, I'd like to ask you a question. I wonder if you may have spoken with President Biden at all. What is his reaction? And do you see this increasing support for NASA and international partners? Have you heard from any of them who work with Artemis and the Gateway project? Thank you.
Well, as you know, the president is in Bali, Indonesia, and I would not be surprised that since it was daytime over there, whereas it's nighttime here, if whatever meeting he was in, if his assistants did not take a TV to him and show him the launch. And that would make him very, very proud. And I look forward to speaking to him sometime after he gets back and gets over his jet lag. Now, what was your second question?
About, do you think this is going to increase support in the Congress, and have you heard from international partners?
First of all, I think it's noteworthy that in a nation in which our politics is so split, where do you have both R's and D's come together to support? And our space program is such a place of reconciliation and camaraderie and bipartisanship. And so I think the success of this rocket and the future potential success of the mission is only going to energize the support that we have in Congress. My goodness, look at the diet of successes that they've been fed. Perseverance, ingenuity, all on Mars. DART hitting a bullseye 7 million miles away. Look at all the science that has come out. And now James Webb Space Telescope giving us these unbelievable pictures of light that's been traveling for 13.5 billion years. And now going back to the moon in order to go to Mars. That, I think, is going to engender a great deal of support on Capitol Hill.
Next question in the second row.
Hi, Andrea Leinfelder of the Houston Chronicle. Administrator Nelson, in 2010 you were essential for getting the NASA Authorization Act passed. And so you saw the legislative side, and now you've gotten to implement it and you've gotten the rocket off the ground. So I'm curious how your perspective has changed from when you were writing the bill to when you were implementing it, what that experience has been like, and if you think you would see things differently now that you've been on the implementing side. Thank you.
One of the first things that I did when we got back to the buildings here was I sent a text to Senator Kay Bailey Hutchinson, who was my partner in crafting the legislation back 12 years ago. As soon as I can get their address, I will also be texting Rob Neighbors, who was an assistant in the White House to President Obama, and to Jack Lew, who was the director of the OMB at the time. He became later the chief of staff to President Obama, and then ended up as Secretary of the Treasury, to congratulate them, as I did Kay, as well. That's just a speck. I mean, the congratulations goes to everybody. This team, this professionalism, that performance tonight that you saw. And so my perspective has changed because I get to see it from this point of view. However, remember back in those early legislative years, I got to see it from an inside view when I participated in the 24th flight of the space shuttle. And so this is really a gratifying time, but it's only going to get better. In 2 years, we're going to be sending humans to the moon. In 3 years, we're going to be landing on the moon. And then it's going to be a series of things, including, someone mentioned earlier, Gateway, a lunar outpost, a mini space station. So Artemis IV is actually going to go up, install Gateway in this lunar elliptical polar orbit, and then Gateway in this lunar elliptical polar orbit, and then
question. I was just wondering, some of the early video footage that was coming down from the ICPS and the Orion, there appeared to be some slight yawing back and forth to the camera. I'm kind of used to the kind of locked off, no motion of the camera shots before, so I didn't know if this was just unique to the architecture with the ICPS and the Orion, or if it was something unexpected.
Yeah, I'll just say that those, and Howard can correct me here, those images were from the wingtip cameras on the solar array wings of Orion, and they were basically when we had a ignition event on the RL-10 engine, which is the interim cryo propulsion stage's upper engine. We saw that during the perigee raise maneuver, but then also at the ignition and startup of the translunar injection maneuver. It's normal. We knew that that would happen. There's a reason that we position those solar arrays in a very specific position, because we do impart a load on these solar array wings, and they are fairly lengthy. Howard probably knows exactly how long the solar array wings are. I don't remember off the top of my head, but there's a reason that we put those in those positions. I don't know if you have anything to add, Howard.
No, I think that was very good, Mike. Thanks.
Thank you. Jeff Faust with Space News in the back.
Jeff Faust, Space News. Question probably from Mike Bolger. I think we were all holding our breaths when we heard about the hydrogen leak. Fortunately, it was fixed. I wonder if you could talk us through exactly what the problem was and what that Red Crew team did when they went out to the pad to fix the problem.
Yeah, definitely be glad to. Before I do, as I had kind of had a chance to listen to some of the questions and just look out into the crowd, I love that there are so many Artemis shirts, Artemis hats. I love that, we've got a media team that is as excited about what we're doing as y'all are. So I just wanted to thank everybody for that. So yeah, let's see, what we had was we had a leak in the replenish valve, which is down in a cryo valve complex that we've got in the base of the mobile launcher. And so, that caused us to go into a stop flow on both core stage and upper stage while we resolved the leak that we were seeing in the base. We sent a red team out, and basically what the red team was doing, we had a couple folks in there. It was kind of a tight, I don't know if you could see the video, I'm not sure what you were seeing and what, kind of a tight fit, but out there with a torque wrench, and they were tightening down some packing nuts. And there were two packing nuts, and they were tightening down either side of them. They tightened them, we cycled the valve, we went back in, put a wrench on them, they were still turning a little bit. We cycled the valve again, tightened them a little more. We did it a third time, and then they really were solid, and so we felt good that, those packing nuts, in fact, were tight, and that we had a good valve. And so we got the red team back, away from the pad, and got back into fast fill and then topping and then replenish. And as we did that, in fact, we had resolved the problem, and we no longer had that leak in the base. So really great work by that red team. It's always, a hard thing to do, to send the red team out to the launch pad. You only do it when you feel like you have to. But in this case, I think the team felt, that really our most likely case here was that we just had, some loose nuts on those valves. And so we sent the team out, and they did a terrific job, and we got that issue resolved. So, definitely a high moment, a low moment when we first saw the leak, because we all know we've struggled through some of the hydrogen leaks that we've had in the past, but really a high moment when we recognized that we'd solved the problem.
Thanks, Mike. Just want to remind the folks on the phone that if you have a question, we're happy to take those over the line as well. And you press *1 to get into the queue. Next up, we have a question here in the front.
Yusuke Tomiyama, the Yomiuri Shimbun, Japanese newspaper. My question is to Administrator Nelson. In July, you expressed your concern about China's moon exploration in a German newspaper. So now what do you think about China's moon exploration? And so would it be possible for U.S. to cooperate with China regarding moon exploration? Thank you.
The question is, do I think that it would be possible for China and the U.S. to cooperate? I hope so, but I see no evidence of that. To the contrary, what we have seen is a lack of visibility, a secretiveness, a lack of transparency. Most recently, in the very successful mission, apparently, of them putting up their third stage for their space station, not having the stage on reentry saved enough fuel in order to have a control reentry, and then not sharing trajectory information. Now, fortunately, it fell in the ocean. The second component that went up, there was a chance that we could see before it fell in the Indian Ocean that it might come down in Greece, and it might come down then on the track in Saudi Arabia. Fortunately, it came down in the Indian Ocean. So I wish I could give a more optimistic point of view. I personally talked to the Chinese ambassador, who I happened to run into at a Sunday brunch, and he said, well, we can cooperate. And I said, well, let me give you an example of something that you could do. I said, 50 years ago, we returned samples from the moon. We shared that with the international community. You have just recently returned a sample from the moon. You ought to share that with the international community. And that was about 6 months ago when we had that conversation, and nothing has happened.
Next question. Here in the second row.
Hi, Sophie Sanchez with Cosmic Chicago. First of all, congratulations to all of you. My question is for Mike Bolger. A follow-up on a question I asked Charlie back in August regarding the role of the Red Crew in assisting launches. She said then that the difference between shuttle and now was the use of high-tech cameras and just more technology in general so that the crew can evaluate and report remotely. But then she also said that up until now, that has been adequate, and but you still have the option to send the Red Crew to the pad if you needed to. Can you tell me a little bit about that moment in the countdown when you guys realized that tech alone wasn't adequate enough, and you needed to send the crew? How was that decision made?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So let me think. So, we recognized we had a leak, and we were able to get a camera on it, although it wasn't a great view. We kind of were seeing the top half, and we could see some vapors. And so that helped inform that, in fact, what our measurements were telling us, we could also visually verify. We talked about were there options where we wouldn't have to send a red team out there, and specifically we were talking about could you basically shut the replenish valve off and use the main valve in a very delicate way to try to perform that same function of a replenish. And the cryo team, which is an amazing team here at the Kennedy Space Center, had actually written a procedure and determined how they would do that if it ever came to the point where they had a replenish valve that wasn't working. But none of us really thought that was an ideal approach, particularly as we've talked about kind of needing to have this kinder and gentler loading process. We were concerned about where normally you would have you would be using a replenish valve with a much lower flow, and I would be trying to manage this issue with a different valve which was a lot bigger. And really, as the team talked about it, I think the prevailing opinion was it's probably these packing nuts. Let's go out there and let's just put a wrench on them and let's see if a turn of the wrench is going to resolve this issue. And when we got out there and when we got that wrench on and when it turned, we started to feel pretty good that we probably were going to be able to resolve this. So, I appreciate your question about how does technology help you, and there are so many ways that it does. And you talk about the ability to get imagery that you can never get before. There are also times when you just got to put a wrench on a nut and you got to resolve an issue that you've got, and that's where we ended up today.
Marcia Smith with Space Policy Online.
Thank you. I think this is to Mike Serafin. I'm curious if you have any update on the Cubesats. Were they all deployed? Are they all functioning?
Yeah, Marcia, thank you for the question. In terms of the Cubesat deploys, the earliest deploys are not quite 4 hours into the mission, and I'm not sure exactly where we are timeline-wise. We're probably, it's partly because of the sleep shift in the early morning launch, but the first group of 5 ought to be deployed any time now, and they continue on until about 8 hours after launch. So they're starting soon, and we needed to get separated from the Orion spacecraft to expose the deployment area, and then the interim cryo propulsion stage needed a performance disposal maneuver. All that has happened, so now we're setting up for that Cubesat deployment phase, and I haven't heard of the status of those yet, but we will get an update as we get further into the mission on those.
And since I have folks talking into my ear, I can tell you that they are expected to have been deployed at this time. Next question. In the second row here, in the blue shirt. Or third, sorry.
Hi, Stephen Clark from Spaceflight Now. I think my question's probably for Mike Serafin, but Howard, you can pitch in if you want to. With the successful launch, I'm wondering if you could quantify or describe the amount of risk that's been retired from this mission with the successful demonstration of the Space Launch System. And looking ahead, I know the big priority one objective is getting the lunar reentry velocity at reentry and splashdown. But over the course of the outbound leg to the moon, what are some of the major test objectives that are planned over the next few days?
Yeah, Stephen, that's a great question. Thank you for that question. Certainly, the Space Launch System delivering with precision to the point of translunar injection was one of the objectives, and it did exactly that. The insertion altitude we were aiming for a 975 by 16 nautical mile insertion. We got 972 by 16. That's well within the noise of a system like this. And then the vehicle delivered us to the point of translunar injection. The quote that I heard was dead on, but there was a word inserted between dead on that I won't share with you here in this setting. But that just shows the precision of the system. In terms of how much risk did it retire, certainly the ascent environment, all the separation events through booster separation, the service module fairing separation, the jettison of the launch abort system, ascent with the core stage and shutting down the 4 RS-25 engines properly, jettisoning the core stage, and then interim cryo propulsion stage doing a perigee raise maneuver, followed by a translunar injection maneuver, while you've got the deployment of the Orion solar arrays going on in proximity to it, and positioning those in time that all of these choreographed events happen such that you do it within the load-bearing capability of the system, and then getting Orion converted off of battery power to solar array power before the batteries expired. All those things were demonstrated successfully today. And then disposal of the interim cryo propulsion stage, responsibly disposing of the interim cryo propulsion stage, as Senator Nelson was alluding to earlier. Now we flew up through the low Earth orbit and micrometeorite orbital debris band. We had 40 collision avoidance cutouts today during our 2-hour window, and the team found the right time to go because of our ability to screen through all that. We are heading outbound through the Van Allen radiation belts. Those are high periods of concentrated radiation. We are flying outbound past the Earth's magnetic field into the deep space environment where it gets extremely cold. The spacecraft loves to fly tail to sun for thermal and power production, and we've demonstrated all of that. Now we've got a lot of in-space propulsive maneuvers ahead of us. We'll demonstrate the service module. We'll demonstrate deep space command and control using the deep space network, and then we've got to set up for the second part of our priority one objective on the way home, which is the direct reentry of our brand new spacecraft with a new heat shield design, and then recover it. So we bought down a lot of risk today, but we've got a lot of mission ahead of us. As I said at the outset, we are on day one of a 26-day mission. And I don't know, Howard, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, maybe I'll just add a couple more things. Mike, that was a great recap. Certainly going outbound, we're going to be testing both engines, our main engine, and of course our auxiliary set of engines as well. So that'll be very important as we do all these correction maneuvers and the big burns. And of course the thermal environment that we're going to see in deep space is going to be always going to be a challenge, and we're going to correlate our models and get the data that we need from all our sensors. And certainly when we come back and do a re-entry, our parachutes, we've done a lot of testing on the parachutes, 27 qualification and development tests alone. And so I think, showing that at those re-entry speeds and slowing the vehicle down so we have a nice touchdown, 20 miles per hour, will be a great day. So all those things will be really important as we learn and go forward.
Lauren Grush with Bloomberg, in the back on the left.
Hi, Lauren Grush with Bloomberg. I'm just wondering if you got more details from the range about that Ethernet switch that gave us all trouble, and why did that crop up during what seemed like a pretty critical part of the countdown? Thanks.
Lauren, I'll tell you what I know on the switch. It was required to take some of the remote range safety systems and process that at their control center, and they had a computer problem at the range. I think I would direct that question more towards the Space Force and the range, because that is not a NASA system. I don't know, Mike, if you have anything to add on that, but it was a system required for public safety and range safety.
And I think you got it. It was basically an Ethernet switch that allowed them to tie in data from their remote sites into their central hub. Obviously they didn't expect to lose it at that time. It was at an important time, but they also recovered from it, well, and enabled us to have a launch today. So while it was unfortunate and untimely, it was also well handled and allowed us to get to a launch. So, kudos to them.
Yeah, I think that is a key aspect of what we saw today, was the partnership between the range and NASA Kennedy Space Center and the firing room. They raised their hand very quickly and said, we've got an issue here, and we need to recover this before we can say that we can safely and responsibly launch. And they coordinated that with very close coordination with our launch director, Charlie, in Firing Room 1, and they gave an estimate as to when they could recover, and they were very close to it. And they worked through it very methodically, and they told us every step of the way where they were in terms of the recovery, and then that allowed our launch operations team to pick up a time very close to our intended launch window open time. I think that the real delay that, we didn't go quite at window open, but we went within the first hour, really was a byproduct of needing to send the red crew out to the pad, and we had to halt some of the loading operations. And in the interest of safety for those people, they were going into a hazardous environment, but in the interest of controlling the environment as much as you could, we had to halt that operation, which in turn kind of slowed the launch countdown and cryo loading and getting specifically the upper stage fully configured. So that, again, seeing that choreography between the Space Force on the range side and the NASA team in Firing Room 1, I think was extremely well handled today, and our hats off to the Space Force for working through that with us.
Next question. Here in front.
Hi, it's Richard Knuckles from Sky. I've got a question for Emily, actually. So Bill talks about the legacy of this program, and one thing which really has struck me talking to a lot of the engineers is the amount of women involved in the behind the scenes in the Artemis program. As you were watching the launch, there must have been an immense pride, watching Charlie doing her thing. Can you just talk about the emotions you felt and how it feels to be part of this Artemis program?
Certainly. I mean, I think my emotions are matched pretty well, not only by everybody at this table, but probably everybody who was watching it, whether they were working it or not. There's an enormous amount of pride. There's a great deal of awe. And that pride is not only in the individuals that we know and our friends who have worked so hard over the number of years, who have gotten this opportunity to contribute to this great mission, but also just in the fact that we together have gotten to this place where we're going back. I wasn't here yet the last time we went, and so it's really exciting for my generation and for the Artemis generation to get the opportunity to go to the moon and beyond. The fact that if you see the photos and imagery from the last time we were there, the diversity of the workforce, the diversity of the people who had the opportunity to contribute was maybe not quite where it is today. I think that's a point of pride. But it's in no way surprising, because I think we've all grown in that direction as well. And so when I was interviewing to become a flight director 15 years ago, I made a little bit of a faux pas saying I really wanted to be here and be a flight director when we went back to the moon. And at the time, that was considered, well, you can't stay in the flight director office that long. So I'm pretty glad I stuck around.
If I could, I might just add to that. So, Charlie's obviously a beloved member of our team. She's the leader of our launch team. I had a tie earlier today. Charlie wears green on launch day. Charlie has something green. She does her nails green, and so the guys wore green ties today. Just to kind of support Charlie. And if it's your first launch in a new position in the firing room, after the launch, she cuts your tie. And so I don't have a tie today because she cut my green tie. And there were a lot of green ties getting cut. And it was really in support of a pretty amazing member of our team who happened to be a female. Yeah.
Thank you both. Next up, we have a question on the phones from David Curley with Discovery.
Thank you, Jackie. Mike Serafin, can you talk a little bit more about Day 26? That's your primary goal on this mission, and the heat shield. How are you feeling about it? What will you be thinking over the next 25 days?
Yeah, David, thank you for that question. As I said at the outset, we've bought down half of our priority one already through the rocket, setting up those initial conditions. We do have a long 4-week mission ahead of us. And we're just going to work it day by day, and we need to work it with vigilance, and we are going to do some extraordinarily hard stuff. We're going to fly within 62 miles of the surface of the moon and use a lunar gravity assist to insert us into what is called the distant retrograde orbit, and then shake down the spacecraft while it's out there, and then on the return fly another 62 miles from the surface of the moon and use a lunar gravity assist to send us back to Earth. And we need to do it with enough precision that we hit from 250,000 miles away. That is essentially our deorbit maneuver. We need to do it with enough precision that we don't skip back out into deep space, or that we don't come in too steep and overstress the vehicle. So there's a lot ahead of us. We're just going to work it day by day. We're actually going to share some fun stuff along the way. We're going to share imagery similar to what we did earlier today of, kind of first shots of the Earth from the spacecraft. We're going to share imagery from inside the cockpit. We're going to share imagery close up of the moon. But there's a lot of hard stuff that we've got to demonstrate. And at the tail end, kind of our capstone is going to be the high-speed reentry. We're going to come back at Mach 32, or 24,500 miles an hour. We're going to slow that spacecraft in about 20 minutes as it goes from entry interface to subsonic and parachute deployment, and then splash down in the Pacific. When we get to that point, it will signal the arrival of our deep spacecraft and human transportation, and it will show that we've got a capability in place in combination with the rocket that we've already demonstrated that puts us on a path to accomplish the rest of the Artemis manifest in front of us. So again, we've got to take it day by day. We're going to learn stuff as we go. We've got thousands and thousands of measurements and data and engineering measurements we're going to take along the way to ensure that we understand the margins, and if they're a little bit less than we thought they were, we need to take those into account before we put humans on board. So we're going to learn a lot from this mission, and if we're lucky and we fly right down the middle, that'll be a great day. And if we learn from it, that goes back to why we're having an uncrewed test flight and why we purposefully set up an uncrewed mission before we're going to fly astronauts on the next mission.
Thanks, Mike. I think we're running up on our hour, but we do have time for a couple more questions in the room. Here in front.
Yep. John Zarella for My Radar. A couple of things. How much do you lose by not flying the 40 days plus you're down to 25 days in day? You have the mannequins on board and you're gathering all this data. For anybody who wants to answer that. And the other one was, over the course of the months, we've talked to so many folks on your team who have been with the program since the very beginning, more than 10 years. What do you have to say to long-timers out there who persevered? And as you said, Mr. Administrator, it's been a long time coming.
Go ahead.
Start? Well, I'll answer your second question. I'm a long-timer myself, and I've been with the Orion program since the very beginning. I would say to my colleagues and the people that came before me, I mean, it is obviously a historic day for us. We've dreamed about this day. We've worked very hard, persevered through a lot of challenges, not only weather and other things, changes in terms of administration and such. But it represents. I think John said it very well. The hardware is the hardware will perform. It's the people across the country, and in fact in Europe as well, working with us, spending long hours trying to make this endeavor happen. And I think it's a very proud moment. And I look at what we did today, and I reflect back upon, all the late nights and the long hours we worked together with all the people that across the country, like I said, in Europe, trying to make this happen. And we should all be proud of what we've accomplished so far, but we've got a ways to go. And each day is going to be very important for us in this mission, because I think we're going to learn a lot as we go forward. So that's how I would respond to that part of the question.
Yeah, and I would agree with Howard. Perseverance is the word of the day here. This team up here and the folks that they represent have had to persevere through quite a lot over the years, and months and months and months of preparation and testing and coding and just understanding on the ground what the systems are capable of, are representative of where we got to today. But in terms of whether we lose objectives through a 26-day mission instead of a 40 to 42-day mission, it is in the margins of extra data takes. The longer time we have out there in the distant retrograde orbit allows us to get more data, but we would still accomplish all the objectives. When we baselined the Artemis I mission, it was originally just a 26-day mission, and when we started looking at the mission availability, we realized that we couldn't launch as frequently as we would like. The launch availability was roughly 1 week per month. And we asked the team, can you come up with a solution to improve our mission availability? And they came up with what we call a variable mission duration. We had a short class and a long class mission, and in the middle, you extend the stay about the moon in the distant retrograde orbit, and that actually doubled our mission availability, so we could launch roughly 2 weeks per month, or roughly half the month. And that was seen as a win in terms of mission availability, and also in terms of buying down risk. But we're flying a 26-day mission, and that is originally what we had intended. It just gives us fewer day to take opportunities for a whole host of things, but we are confident that in the time frame that we're talking about flying, that we can get enough engineering data to say that we can fly crew with confidence on the next mission.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for one more question. Not hearing any in the room, so we have one more on the phones with Jim McKenna with Aerospace Tech Review.
Thanks very much. For Mike, and you may have already addressed this, but what's the next big milestone that will affirm your confidence that you're writing down the risk of the mission and the vehicle? And also, I think for Emily, when does the Orion arrive at the moon?
Okay. Emily, do you want to start?
I don't think I have that particular piece of date. Let me see if I can remember it. You go first, and I'll see if I can remember it.
I might be able to help you on both accounts. So, in terms of the next big milestone, it would be what we call the outbound trajectory correction maneuver, which would be the first firing of the propulsion system on the Orion spacecraft, the service module. We purposefully have a 30-second firing of the service module engine, and that happens just under 8 hours into the mission, so 7 hours, 47 minutes into the mission. And then, I'm sorry, Jim, I lost the... When do we arrive at the distant retrograde orbit? I've got it here. Give me just a second.
Yeah, it's roughly a week.
Yeah.
And then we spend about a week in the orbit, and then we spend about a week coming home.
There's a reason I write this stuff down, Jim. Hang on just a second. We actually issue memos on this while I'm stalling for time, just to keep everybody synchronized. I will find it, Jim, here. Hang on just a second. All right, so outbound powered flyby is on the 21st. It's 7:44 Eastern time in the morning. So that is the first of the two maneuver sequence that does that lunar flyby in the slingshot, 62 miles from the surface of the moon. We do that behind the moon, by the way, so we're not going to see it until after the maneuver is complete, so we're kind of blind. And we'll when we get acquisition of signal on the spacecraft afterward, we'll know that the maneuver was successful. And then the second of the maneuvers for the distant retrograde insertion is on the 25th. So I guess that's the day after Thanksgiving at 4:52 p.m. I hope that answers your question.
All right, thank you all so much. That's all the time we have this morning. But the Artemis I mission is just beginning. In just a few hours, we'll have live TV coverage and commentary of Orion's first outbound trajectory burn that Mike just mentioned. So stay tuned at nasa.gov/live and go Artemis.
Sound suppressor water now flowing under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiate. 7, 6, 5. 4-stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. and liftoff of Artemis I. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.